The promise the woods made to us each morning was one of quiet dignity. It was a covenant of birdsong and rustling leaves, signed by the deer that stepped silently through the morning mist at the edge of our lawn. After a lifetime of city noise and deadlines, my wife and I had finally bought ourselves 5 acres of that promise. 5 acres of silence, tucked away from the world, but the sound that broke that promise one Tuesday morning, that wasn't made by God or nature. It was the angry metallic scream of a chainsaw, and it was coming from our property line. My name is Ethan, and for the better part of a year, my wife, Dr. Maya Vance, and I had been living our dream. We weren't retired, not yet, but we were tired. Tired of the concrete, tired of the sirens, tired of living so close to our neighbors we could hear them arguing about what to watch on TV. Our search had been relentless. We wanted privacy, we wanted woods, and most of all, we wanted freedom from the petty tyrannies of a homeowners association. We found it in a plot of land that bordered the pristine, almost surgically manicured community of the Oak Creek Preserve. Our land wasn't part of it. We had no gate, no fees, and no rules about the color of our mailbox. We had towering pines, a creek that gurgled after a good rain, and a beautiful, stubborn patch of wildness we called home. Of course, freedom makes certain people nervous. The kingdom of Oak Creek was ruled by its HOA, and its queen was a woman named Evelyn Reed. We'd met her once during a welcome visit that felt more like a reconnaissance mission. She had a porcelain smile that never quite reached her eyes, and those eyes, they were constantly moving, taking inventory of our slightly too long grass, our unapologetically gravel driveway, the old pickup truck I used for hauling firewood. The invitation started soon after. Mandatory community barbecues, holiday decorating planning committees. We politely declined everyone. We weren't their subjects. We were the wild frontier just beyond her perfect, picket-fenced world, and I could tell it drove her crazy. The tight smiles from joggers who passed our driveway, the way conversations at the local grocery store would dip into whispers when we walked by. It was a low, constant hum of disapproval. We were outsiders, and they were about to give us a reason to be enemies. When that chainsaw roared to life, a hot, helpless anger surged through me. I looked out the kitchen window and saw them, a work crew of 3 men carving into a line of old-growth oaks that stood squarely on our side of the property markers we'd had surveyed just months before. I was ready to storm out there, fists clenched, ready to shout myself hoarse. But my wife was different. Maya is a doctor, a PhD, not an MD, and she sees the world in systems, in causes and effects, in patterns of behavior. While I felt the red mist of anger, she simply stood at the window for a long moment, her expression unreadable. She wasn't angry. She was assessing. There was an unnerving calm about her, the kind of quiet that settles over a field right before lightning strikes. "Stay here, Ethan," she said, her voice even. "Don't say a word." She slipped on a pair of boots, walked out the front door and started across the lawn. No shouting, no waving her arms. She moved with a purpose that was both graceful and absolute. I watched from the window, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. Buddy, our sleepy golden retriever, lifted his head from the rug, letting out a low whine as if he, too, could sense the shift in the atmosphere. She walked right up to the crew leader, a burly man with a permanent scowl and a faded company logo on his shirt. He glanced at her, then dismissed her, turning to bark an order at one of the other men. Maya waited patiently. When he finally turned back, she spoke, her voice clear and pleasant enough to be heard over the idling engine of the saw. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm Dr. Vance. I own this property. Could I please see your work permits for clearing this land?" The man actually laughed. It was a greasy, dismissive sound. "Don't need a permit, lady," he grunted, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a dirty glove. "This is an HOA beautification project. We're clearing the brush along the preserve's border." "I understand that," Maya said, her tone never wavering. "But this isn't the preserve's border. This is my land. And you're cutting down my trees, so I'll ask again. May I see your permit?" "Look, lady, your problem is with the HOA, not with me," he said, taking a half step toward her, trying to use his size to intimidate. "Now, if you'll excuse us—" That was when he made his mistake. He turned his back on her. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't touch him. She simply pulled out her phone. She held it up, the camera lens pointed directly at them, and she began to record. She didn't narrate. She didn't threaten to call the cops. She just stood there, silent and steady as a surgeon, panning the phone from the foreman's face to the half-felled oak, to the truck with the company logo, to the clear property marker stake just a few feet from where he stood. The low hum of the chainsaw sputtered and died. The other two workers had stopped, watching the scene unfold with nervous uncertainty. The foreman's bravado began to evaporate under the unwavering gaze of that small, black lens. His greasy laugh was a distant memory. The silence that now stretched between them was heavy, and it belonged entirely to my wife. He muttered something under his breath about calling his boss, then turned and stomped toward his truck, the other two following like sheep. They didn't say another word. They just packed up their gear and drove away, leaving a scar of sawdust and violated earth behind them. I met Maya on the porch as she walked back, her face still impassive. She was tapping away on her phone, her thumb moving with swift precision. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice still shaky with leftover adrenaline. "I sent the video, along with a time-stamped satellite image of the property line, to the county planning department," she said, as calmly as if she were ordering groceries online. "And I sent a copy to the HOA's general counsel, informing them they have 24 hours to provide a written plan for remediation and damages." I just stared at her. I had been ready for a shouting match. Maya had just performed a surgical strike. The county slapped the Oak Creek Preserve HOA with a fine that made our eyes water just reading about it in the formal notice. $50,000 for unauthorized land development and destruction of protected trees. We had thought, foolishly, that this would be the end of it. A costly lesson for them, a clear victory for us. We were wrong. What we didn't know was what was happening a few hundred yards away, inside Evelyn Reed's sterile, air-conditioned office overlooking her perfectly manicured kingdom. Evelyn wasn't shouting. She wasn't panicking. She was on the phone with her lawyer, her voice a low, dangerous purr. "No, I don't care what the county says," she hissed. "Look into the original land deeds. Find the Oak Creek founding charter from the 70s. There was an old covenant about maintaining aesthetic continuity for all adjacent properties. Find it!" She listened for a moment, her long red fingernails tapping a silent, furious rhythm on her glass desk. "I don't care if it's a long shot. I want leverage. I want to put them on the defensive." She hung up, her porcelain smile now a thin, hard line. She paused for a moment, staring out the window in the direction of our house, a place of wild imperfection that offended her very soul. Then she picked up the phone again, dialing a number from a private, handwritten list. A gruff voice answered on the other end. "Frank," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "It's Evelyn Reed. I have a situation here, a security issue that requires a more delicate touch. I need a professional, someone to assess a situation, someone who isn't afraid of a little confrontation." We thought a $50,000 fine would be the final word, the thunderclap that ended the storm. We thought wrong. In our comfortable, middle-class world, we were used to problems being resolved through official channels, through fines and strongly worded letters from lawyers. We were naive. We had won a battle against a bureaucracy, but we had failed to understand the enemy. We weren't fighting a system. We were fighting a person, and we had just made it personal for Evelyn Reed. The real war began not with a bang, but with a whisper. It started with the letters. They weren't mailed. They were placed in our mailbox like secret communiques, typewritten on cheap paper, unsigned. "Your lack of lawn maintenance is becoming an eyesore to the community." Another one, a few days later, concerns have been raised about the non-standard color of your window shutters. They were petty, absurd little jabs. We weren't even in their community, but their purpose wasn't to enforce rules. It was to remind us that we were being watched, that the enemy was close enough to walk up our driveway while we slept. Then came the cars. A pristine white Lexus, Evelyn's, would slow to a crawl as it passed our road. Sometimes a different car, one we didn't recognize, would be idling at the turnoff, the driver pretending to be lost or checking their phone, but always angled just so, with a clear view of our front porch. I started keeping the curtains drawn more often. The feeling of our private sanctuary being under constant surveillance was a slow-acting poison, seeping into the peace we had worked so hard to build.
"Ethan, we know you,"
Dan said, his voice strained, "but we have to take this stuff seriously. The email mentioned the $50,000 fine the HOA received. It was very detailed. For now, we just need you to sign a statement affirming you understand company policy. It's a formality." It didn't feel like a formality. It felt like a violation. I walked out of that meeting feeling a profound sense of filth, as if someone had thrown mud on my reputation. Evelyn's reach extended further than I had ever imagined. She hadn't just trespassed on our land. She had trespassed on my life, on my career. She was trying to isolate us, to cut us off at the knees financially and socially, to make fighting back so painful that we would either surrender or sell. That night I came home defeated. The joy I usually felt turning onto our long, gravel driveway was gone, replaced by a knot of anxiety. Maya was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She took one look at my face and put the knife down. What happened? I told her everything. The meeting, the accusation, the feeling of being cornered. When I finished, I slumped into a kitchen chair, the fight completely drained out of me. "Maya, this is too much," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "She's coming after my job now. Maybe we should just... I don't know. Build a taller fence. Ignore them. You're treating this like one of your operations. Strategic, tactical. But these are just bored, petty suburbanites. Are we making it worse by fighting back so hard?" She was quiet for a long time, looking out the window into the darkening woods. For the first time I saw a flicker of something other than calm control in her eyes. It was a shadow, a memory. "When I was in training," she began, her voice low and soft, "my team was running a simulation, a domestic threat scenario. The target was a university professor, quiet man, tweed jacket, glasses. Everyone on the team treated him like a joke, an amateur. We cut corners, we got sloppy." She turned to face me, and the shadow in her eyes was deeper now. The amateur had built a viable chemical weapon in his garage. In the simulation, our entire entry team was neutralized. If it had been real, people would have died, Yannin, because we saw a man in a tweed jacket and didn't look closer. We underestimated the danger of a quiet man with a deep-seated grievance. She walked over and put her hand on my shoulder. Her touch was firm, grounding. "Evelyn Reed may just be a woman with a superiority complex and too much time on her hands. But I will not make the mistake of underestimating a petty tyrant again, not when our home, our life is on the line. This isn't an operation, Ethan. This is defense, and we will defend it." I nodded, a new resolve hardening inside me. She was right. We weren't the aggressors here. We were just refusing to be victims. And while we were fortifying our resolve inside our small wooden fortress, the threat we didn't yet know existed was doing his homework. In a cramped second-floor apartment across town that smelled of stale coffee and regret, Frank Kowalski leaned toward the glow of his laptop. The screen illuminated a face that was a roadmap of bad decisions and lost fights. Kowalski had been a cop for 20 years, a good one until his temper and a bottle of bourbon had cost him his badge. Now he did private security consulting, which was a nice way of saying he did the dirty work for people with more money than scruples. He'd already pulled the public records on Ethan and Dr. Maya Vance. He dismissed me quickly. Desk jockey, he muttered to himself, scrolling through my bland employment history. No threat there. But the woman, she was different. Dr. Maya Vance. He ran her name through a few databases he still had access to. Nothing. No red flags. A clean academic background. Too clean. He found what he was looking for on a local community news site. A bystander video, shot on a cell phone from across the road, of the initial confrontation with the tree-cutting crew. He watched it once, then twice, then a third time, leaning closer. He wasn't watching the argument. He was watching her. A civilian, a normal person, would have been shouting, flushed, waving their hands. They would have been emotional. Maya was a statue. He saw the economy of motion in the way she walked, the flat, assistive stare that never blinked, the absolute lack of any fear response when the foreman postured in front of her. Most of all, he saw the way she held her phone, not like a weapon, but like a tool, steady, methodical, detached. No, 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 Kowalski whispered to the screen, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. You've had training, Doctor, real training. You're no college professor I've ever met. He picked up his phone and dialed Evelyn Reed.
I've reviewed the situation, he said, his voice a low growl. The husband's a nobody, but the wife, she's the asset and the threat. You want this handled, you let me do it my way. It's time for some proactive surveillance. We need to see what she does under pressure.
A week passed in unnerving quiet. The letters stopped. The slow-driving cars vanished. It was a silence more unsettling than the harassment had been. Then, one afternoon, our neighbor from down the road, a man named Bob, flagged me down at the mailbox. He was a portly man in his 60s who always seemed to be working in his yard. "Ethan, hey!" he called out, wiping his hands on his jeans. He had an earnest, friendly face. "Listen, my wife and we heard about the trouble Evelyn's been giving you. It's just terrible what she's doing." I was so starved for an ally that I felt a surge of relief. "Thanks, Bob. It's been a lot."
"Look," he said, leaning in conspiratorially. "This is just between us, but you should go talk to Sheriff Brody. He's a good man. Old school. Been the sheriff here for 30 years. He doesn't have much patience for Evelyn's high and mighty act. If you explain the situation to him, man to man, he'll set her straight. He's a straight shooter." The suggestion felt like a lifeline. An official, respected figure who could finally put a stop to it all. I thanked Bob profusely and rushed inside to tell Maya. The next morning we drove into town and walked into the sheriff's office. It was exactly as you'd imagine. Dark wood paneling, the smell of old paper, photos of uniformed men shaking hands going back decades. Sheriff Brody himself was a tall, weathered man with a kind face and a slow, deliberate way of speaking. He listened patiently, steepling his fingers on his large wooden desk as I laid out the whole story. The trees, the letters, the harassment, the threat to my job. I tried to sound reasonable, not hysterical. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "Look, folks, I hear you," he said, his voice paternal and calm, "and I'm sorry you're having a tough time settling in, but right now, what you've got here is a civil dispute. You've got anonymous letters, which could be from anybody, and a cranky HOA president. It's a neighborhood squabble. My advice?" He leaned forward. "Try to get along. Invite Mrs. Reed over for coffee, or get a lawyer to write her a letter. My department can't get involved in this." The dismissal was so total, so patronizing, it felt like a physical blow. We were being treated like children. We gave our thanks, our voices hollow, and walked out into the bright sunlight, feeling more defeated than ever. As I stood blinking on the sidewalk, my eyes fell on a large framed photograph on the wall, just inside the office door. It was a picture from last year's Founders' Day picnic. A group of town officials stood smiling for the camera, and right in the middle was Sheriff Brody, his arm slung casually around the shoulder of a beaming Evelyn Reed. And then I remembered. That first day, during her welcome visit, Evelyn had pointed to a picture on her own mantelpiece. "That's my cousin, Matt," she'd said proudly. "You probably know him as Sheriff Brody." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Bob's friendly advice. The sheriff's folksy dismissal. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a setup. They had sent us on a fool's errand to demoralize us, to show us that the system, the law itself, was on their side. The trap hadn't just been set. We had walked right into it, led by a smiling neighbor, and standing there on that sunny street for the first time, I felt a cold, genuine fear creep into my heart. We were completely, utterly on our own. The week that followed our visit to the sheriff's office was the worst yet. The silence from Evelyn Reed's camp was no longer just unnerving, it felt strategic. It was the quiet of a predator that knows it has its prey cornered, the patient stillness before the final strike. Every rustle of leaves in the wind sounded like footsteps. Every passing car on the main road felt like a threat gathering just out of sight. We were living on a knife's edge, waiting. We knew the other shoe was about to drop. We just didn't know how hard it would hit. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of perfect late summer evening that makes you believe nothing bad could possibly happen. A warm golden haze settled over the pines, and the air was thick with the scent of sun-baked earth. I was on the front porch, a cold glass of iced tea sweating in my hand, watching Buddy doze at my feet. Maya had gone for her usual run, a 5-mile loop through the woods and down the long private road that led to our driveway. It was her way of clearing her head, of shaking off the tension of the last few weeks. I remember glancing at my watch, thinking I should probably start dinner when I heard it. It wasn't the sound of a normal car. It was the low, aggressive rumble of a heavy engine, moving too fast down our gravel road. I stood up instinctively, a sour taste already creeping into my mouth. From the tree line, it emerged like some suburban war chariot. A blacked-out Tahoe SUV. Slapped crookedly on the side was a cheap, peeling decal. Oak Creek Preserve Security. The vehicle hadn't even come to a full stop before 3 men jumped out. They wore matching navy blue polos and cheap tactical pants like they'd raided the clearance rack at a surplus store. The man in the lead, the one I recognized from pictures as Frank Kowalski, had the doughy, bitter face of a man who'd lost one too many fights. The other 2 were just muscle, young, eager, and dumb. And worst of all, one of them, not Kowalski, was openly carrying a pistol on his hip, his hand twitching near the holster like a kid playing soldier in his backyard. My blood ran cold. Maya. I could just barely see her at the far end of the road, jogging toward home, her ponytail bouncing. Her earbuds were in. She was in her own world, oblivious to the circus of aggression unfolding in front of her. They saw her too, and without a moment's hesitation, they moved to block her path, fanning out as if they were starring in some second-rate cop show. My feet felt nailed to the porch. I was too far away to shout, too paralyzed by a sudden, icy fear to move. As Maya approached, Kowalski barked, his voice carrying across the evening air. "Ma'am, stop right there. This is private property. We need to see some identification. Now." Maya slowed to a walk, pulling one earbud out, her brow furrowed in polite confusion. I could almost see the tactical assessment happening behind her eyes, the gears turning at lightning speed. "This is my road," she said, her voice calm, measured. "You're trespassing." Kowalski stepped closer, puffing up his chest. "I'm the head of security for the preserve," he lied, "and this road is a security concern." The man with the pistol moved to her flank, his hand now resting on the butt of the gun. "Just show us your ID and we can all have a nice day." It was a clear, calculated act of intimidation. But as if one nightmare wasn't enough, a movement from the other side of our property caught my eye. Near the woods where they'd cut the trees, another group had appeared. It was Evelyn Reed herself, holding a clipboard like a scepter. With her were 2 men carrying fence posts and a sledgehammer. She saw me standing alone on the porch and gave me a triumphant, condescending smile. "Ethan!" she called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness.
We're just installing the new community borderline as stipulated by the Oak Creek Founding Covenant. I'm sure you understand. I was trapped. A threat in front of me and a threat to my wife 100 yards away. My mind was screaming, but my body wouldn't move. On the road, Kowalski had lost his patience. I'm not asking again. On the ground, hands where I can see them. And with that, the second man drew his pistol, leveling it at Maya with a shaky, two-handed movie cop stance. My heart fell into my shoes. For a single, solitary second, Maya looked the man up and down, almost as if she were deciding whether he was even worth the effort. Then she moved. It wasn't a fight. It was a dismantling. One blink, and she had sidestepped the clumsy gun arm, grabbing the man's wrist in a blur of motion. She twisted the weapon upward until he yelped in pain, the gun clattering uselessly to the gravel. In the same fluid movement, she planted her foot squarely in his chest, sending him sprawling backward. Kowalski and the third man rushed her at once. It was a colossal mistake. Maya spun low, sweeping the third man's legs out from under him. He hit the ground with a grunt. Simultaneously, she pivoted, slamming her elbow into Kowalski's gut. The air rushed out of him in a pained whoosh. They collapsed like marionettes with their strings cut. Before they could even process what had happened, Maya had produced a pair of real, professional-grade handcuffs from a small pouch on her running belt and had the first two men secured. It was over in less than 5 seconds. It was like watching a lioness dismantle a pack of confused, snarling hyenas. She dusted off her hands, walked calmly over to the whimpering Kowalski, and retrieved her own wallet from her belt. She flipped it open, the setting sun catching the polished gleam of a golden badge. "Dr. Maya Vance," she said, her voice now a whip of steel. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. You have the right to remain silent. And trust me," she added, looking down at his pathetic, gasping form, "you should strongly consider using it." As this incredible scene concluded, I saw Evelyn's smug procession in my periphery halt dead in its tracks. Her jaw was slack, her eyes wide with disbelief. The moment of her triumph had evaporated. My paralysis broke. Seeing Maya, safe and in total command, was like a shot of pure courage to my heart. I stepped off the porch and walked toward Evelyn, my stride firm. "Get off my property, Evelyn," I said, my voice low and steady. I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to threaten. The entire power dynamic of the last few months had just been rewritten in 5 seconds of shocking, beautiful violence. Evelyn stared, speechless, first at me, then at the scene down the road where my wife was now calmly using one of the security goons' phones to make a call. And then we all heard it. Faintly at first, then growing rapidly louder, a sound that cut through the evening stillness. It was a sound Evelyn Reed had probably never expected to hear because of her own actions. It was the sound of approaching sirens. And they were getting closer. The first sheriff's cruiser skidded to a stop on the gravel, its headlights cutting through the twilight and painting the chaotic scene in stark relief. Red and blue lights flashed across faces frozen in shock and fear. Evelyn Reed's face, in particular, had gone from triumphant rage to a ghastly, pale mask of disbelief. Her little invasion force stood paralyzed. A sledgehammer dropped foolishly in the grass. 2 deputies emerged, hands hovering near their holsters, their eyes wide as they tried to process the bizarre tableau. Down the road, they saw 3 men in makeshift security uniforms, 2 of them already in handcuffs being watched over by a woman in jogging clothes. On the lawn, they saw a group of well-dressed suburbanites looking like they'd been caught robbing a bank. And in the middle of it all stood my wife and me, the calm center of a hurricane of stupidity. One of the deputies took a few cautious steps forward. "What in the hell?" he began, his voice trailing off. Before he could finish, another vehicle pulled up. This one was larger, an official sheriff's SUV. Sheriff Brody stepped out, his face grim. He surveyed the scene with the weary eyes of a man who knew his peaceful evening was irrevocably over. His gaze swept over Kowalski, a man he clearly recognized, then to the armed man now being cuffed by Maya, and finally,
It landed on his cousin, Evelyn, standing on my lawn. The conflict on his face was a visible thing. It was the clash of family loyalty against a lifetime of wearing a badge. Maya took a step forward, her voice cutting through the confusion with absolute clarity. "Commander Maya Vance, FBI," she stated, holding her badge up so Brody could see it clearly in the flashing lights. "These individuals, operating as an unlicensed security force and hired by that woman," she nodded crisply toward Evelyn, "illegally detained me at gunpoint on my private property. The weapon is secured on the ground over there. They are under citizen's arrest pending your transport." Every word was a nail in Evelyn's coffin. Brody's eyes locked onto Evelyn's. She opened her mouth, a desperate plea forming on her lips, but he cut her off. His voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It was heavy with the profound weight of disappointment and duty. "Evelyn," he said, shaking his head slowly, "what in God's name have you done?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned to his stunned deputy. "Get Kowalski and his friends in the back of the cruisers. Read them their rights. All of them." He then looked directly at Evelyn, his expression now hardened into official resolve. "And you and your friends here are trespassing. I want all of your names. You'll be hearing from my office in the morning." He had made his choice. The law, not blood, had won. The fallout was faster and more spectacular than we could have ever imagined. The tidy-controlled world of the Oak Creek Preserve was about to be ripped open for all to see. The next morning, it began. News vans with satellite dishes on top were parked along the main road, their reporters ambushing residents as they tried to leave through the main gates. The story was irresistible. FBI agent thwarts armed militia hired by local HOA. It was on every local news channel. We saw a clip of Evelyn looking haggard and panicked, trying to shield her face with her purse as she sprinted to her Lexus, peppered with questions she couldn't answer. Within 48 hours, the official charges were announced by the district attorney's office. It was a laundry list of felonies: conspiracy to commit assault, unlawful detainment, brandishing a firearm, and impersonating law enforcement. But the real bombshell was the last announcement. Because a federal officer had been threatened with a deadly weapon, the FBI's local field office was opening its own official inquiry. The case was no longer just local. It was federal. The news sent a shockwave through the HOA. The illusion of Evelyn Reed's absolute power shattered overnight. Emergency board meetings were called. We later heard that the meetings devolved into screaming matches as the other board members realized the extent of the legal and financial jeopardy Evelyn had single-handedly placed them in. Then came the smoking gun. Someone on the inside, terrified of being implicated, leaked the HOA's internal emails to the press. There it was, in black and white, for the whole world to see. A directive from Evelyn Reed herself, sent the day she hired Kowalski. "This couple requires a firm hand. I have authorized Mr. Kowalski's team to assert authority by any means necessary. We must show them and the rest of the community who is in control." That phrase, "by any means necessary," was her undoing. It was proof of intent. It was the end of her reign. The residents of Oak Creek, many of whom had quietly seethed under Evelyn's tyrannical rule for years, finally saw their chance. A petition demanding her immediate removal circulated through the neighborhood. It gathered more signatures in a single afternoon than any HOA initiative in the community's history. They didn't even wait for the next election. An emergency vote was called. The result was unanimous. Evelyn Reed was out. The final, delicious irony. We were told she was escorted from the community clubhouse by an actual licensed security guard who made her turn in her keys to the pool and the tennis courts. The queen had been deposed, her little kingdom in ruins. With the criminal case underway and Evelyn's power dismantled, we moved on to the final front, the civil suit. We hired a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer who, after hearing our story and seeing the evidence, grinned like a shark that smelled blood in the water. We filed a $2 million lawsuit against the Oak Creek Preserve HOA, and against Evelyn Reed personally for emotional distress, property rights violations, and endangerment. I thought they would settle immediately, but I had underestimated the arrogance of their insurance company. They came back fighting, employing a team of high-priced lawyers from the city whose entire strategy was character assassination. Their target was Maya. For 2 days, she sat in a sterile conference room for a deposition. Their lawyers tried everything. They tried to paint her as an unstable, overly aggressive federal agent who used her training to escalate a simple neighborhood disagreement. They questioned her motives, her emotional state, her use of force. "Dr. Vance," one of them sneered, "wouldn't you agree that a civilian might have simply walked away? Isn't it true that your specialized training led you to seek a physical confrontation?" I watched from the corner of the room as Maya, dressed in a simple, professional blouse, calmly met his gaze. "No," she said, her voice steady and clear. "A civilian, when faced with 3 men, one of them armed, blocking her path and illegally demanding she get on the ground, might have been seriously injured or killed. My training didn't lead me to a confrontation. It allowed me to survive one that was forced upon me. Your clients weren't looking for a disagreement. They were looking for a victim. They just happened to pick the wrong one." She never lost her cool. She answered every question with precision, dismantling their narrative piece by piece with facts and evidence. By the end of the second day, the lawyers' smug confidence had evaporated. They saw what we already knew. They couldn't win. Their strategy had failed. 2 weeks later, our lawyer called. The insurance company hadn't just offered to settle. They had agreed to our full asking price on the condition that the terms remain confidential. Their only goal now was to make the problem disappear as quickly and quietly as possible. The dominoes had all fallen. The war was finally over. We had won.